So let me officially welcome everyone to session 3 of our graduate school open house. My name is Nithya Bhaskaran, and I'm here with our panel of graduate students today to talk about applying to grad school. So you can get a student's perspective on the admissions process. And I'm sure many of you, as I'm reading through this chat, have lots of questions to ask our graduate students. And I ask you to type them into the Q&A at any time, and we can get them answered in just a little bit. I'm gonna lead with a couple of questions, the most common questions that we get, and then we'll go into the Q&A. So without delay, I'm excited to be here today with Lucas Fluegel, Jose Colom-Lapetina, Grace Pixton, and Garrett Lindsey. Thank you so much for being a part of this panel today. And I'd like us to get started. If you can introduce yourselves and kind of explain your educational or career path into our graduate program. And we can go Lucas, Jose, Grace, and Garrett.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I'm a first-year, I'm Lucas. I'm a first-year student in Ben Shen's lab on the Florida campus of Scripps. I grew up and did my undergraduate education in Minnesota, go Gophers, etc. There I really focused on synthetic chemistry, but now that I'm here at Scripps, I've shifted my interest a little bit to what's called natural products chemistry. Basically, I'm checking out what cool chemical compounds bacteria make. To give a very brief rundown of my sort of grad school process, because we're going to be talking about this in a lot more detail, I was fortunate enough to start research pretty early in my sophomore year, and pretty much right away I knew, okay, I want to continue with this. I want to do some graduate school. And so when the time came around to start thinking about this, spring of your junior year, fall of senior year, that kind of time, I worked together with my mentor to sort of find places that had things I was interested in. Scripps quickly launched up the list, as I'm sure some of you are familiar with. It tends to do that, I think. Yeah, and I was fortunate enough to get in, and here I am. We'll get into more of the details later, I'm sure, but with that, I'll hand it off to Jose to talk about his experience.
Thank you. So I'm Jose Colom-Lapetina. I am from Puerto Rico. I did my undergraduate in behavioral neuroscience at Northeastern University. And while I was there, I originally had the intention of going into medical school after. But I took a psychopharmacology class, and then I learned about sort of like the front line of psychiatric treatment interventions or like therapeutic interventions available, and was somewhat dissatisfied at the state. It seemed like it really hadn't made that much progress in the last like 50 years or so. So that sort of propelled me to get into research, and I reached out to one of the researchers at the university, and she was really excited about the questions I was asking. And so I ended up working as an undergraduate for for a year, and later as a tech for 1 year in a fear, learning, and memory laboratory where we studied sex differences in fear, learning, and memory, basically how males and females process traumatic events differently. And then after finishing my stint as a tech there, I worked as a research technician at Brown, studying how early life stress affects the developmental trajectory of brain regions to impact risk or resilience for psychopathology. And when I was doing research there, I reached out to Dr. Courtney Miller, who's a researcher here at Scripps, Florida, about a question, and she actually suggested I apply to the graduate program at Scripps. So here I am, a first-year graduate student, currently rotating in Dr. Miller's lab.
Hey everybody, my name is Grace Pixton. I'm also a first year. I think we all are, but I might be wrong on that. Yeah, so I actually graduated 7 years ago from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So I have quite a big gap between my undergraduate and my graduate studies. When I graduated, my first priority was paying off my student loans. I just couldn't really think about postponing actually working and starting my financial foundation before, going into graduate school. So yeah, I wanted to apply for as many jobs as possible, and Silicon Valley is a very great place to start your career if you're in technology, including biotechnology. So I moved up to San Francisco and got a job with a startup, which was really fun. I basically just looked on Craigslist and was applying to like 10 jobs a day, as many as I could find. And my undergrad was in general biology, so I had no like focus on anything. I think I just typed in biology and jobs in Craigslist. And I got a job with a protein engineering firm. So I started in protein engineering, really loved it. Startups are great because if you're one of only 20 people, they let you do a lot of stuff. You're not like just the person who runs one assay. You can, I mean, I guess it could be different anywhere, but my experience was that I was able to try a lot of things. And then from there, I got a job with AbbVie Biotherapeutics, and I was in their antibody engineering group. So pretty adjacent to proteins. I've been in the protein world for a long time. And after all that work experience, it became really clear how valuable a PhD is in this field. There are plenty of great career opportunities without a PhD, but if you have a PhD, then sky's the limit, and there's a lot you can do. So I knew after that that I wanted to pursue my PhD. But my fear at that point, this was like 2 or 3 years ago, I decided I wanted to get a PhD, and I had already been out of school for so long, and I was like, what even is a textbook? Grades, I had no idea how competitive I was going to be. I have been so far removed from academia, and Scripps was really appealing to me because it's not your traditional academic institution. There's no undergraduate population. It feels a lot more like a company, and it has a lot of industry collaboration going on. So it was a bit easier for me to jump back in at an institution like Scripps, and I'm so happy with my decision. So yeah, that's how I ended up here. I'm still doing rotations. I'm doing rotation in Bill Steve's lab right now in immunology and structural biology. Go ahead, Garrett.
All right, so hey everybody, my name is Garrett. I am a first year student on the California campus. And I guess I'll start off with my experience in school. So I took a couple gap years after high school. So from 18 to 21, I didn't particularly know what I really wanted to do. And so I worked at a restaurant and everything and traveled. But then I decided that I wanted to go to school, and I went to community college. I went to community college for 2 years, and that's where I took all my basic science courses, chem, physics, all that fun stuff. And then I transferred to UC Santa Barbara. In between the gap, I knew that I wanted to get into research. So I applied for a summer program at the University of Oregon, and I was in the neurophysiology lab. So that was a 10-week program where I just learned the basics of how to conduct research and just kind of solidified my decision to pursue that at UC Santa Barbara. So I went to UC Santa Barbara. My major was pharmacology. It was a little difficult for me to find opportunities for research in pharmacology. So I ended up doing research in the chemical engineering lab, which is a little different, but I made it work. I still loved research. And so I graduated. I got my BS in pharmacology, but I decided that I needed a little bit more time. I wanted a little bit more experience in a field that I wanted to pursue in grad school. So I took a year. I did a fellowship. It was a post-bac program for underrepresented minorities. And I did that at Baylor College of Medicine. And yeah, I went through the application process last year, and here I am. And I'd be happy to tell anybody about schools I applied to and all that fun stuff. That process.
Of course. Thanks. Yeah. So you took me right to my next question here. So I know a lot of the comments that we got in the chat relate to, this fear of feeling like they don't belong or their application isn't competitive enough. So I'm going to take you back to when you were trying to apply for grad school. How many programs did you scout out, and how many did you apply to, and what types of questions did you have to figure out when you were in that position? And we can go the same, Lucas, Jose, Grace, and Garrett.
So I have a lot of very strong opinions on this. So I scouted out probably at least 40 spots. So I really went all over the place. Any school I could think of, I went, I checked out their chemistry program. I saw what they were doing. But I strongly, very strongly believe that the amount I applied to, only 6, is about the right amount. Because I think that if you, again, this is my opinion, but I think that if you're not able to narrow it down, you're not really keyed into what it is you want to be doing and what's, making you excited about your graduate school experience. So to me, that was probably the hardest part of the entire application process, starting at 40 and narrowing it all the way down to 6. And of course, in this, you have to also consider that, as I think you guys were hearing a little bit about during the last panel session, you got to be kind of very practical about it. You got to have some reach schools. You got to have some maybe safer schools. We can talk maybe about that later if anybody has any specific questions. But in my opinion, narrowing it down more is very helpful because it allows you to sort of really key in on what is exciting you about each spot. I'm going to imagine we're probably going to get some different opinions from the other panelists. So I'm kind of excited to hear what they have to say there.
Right. So kind of in a similar way, I applied to graduate school twice, so 2 rounds. And the first round was a pretty big failure, I would say. So I applied to only 4 schools. They were, great places. I might have been a bit underprepared in my search for. So I think the way I went around it was I thought about the research that really excited me, and that I was really curious about. It could see myself doing, because it is a very large investment of your time. And then I went through there. All right, who do I like? Whose research do I find really interesting and can see? And then obviously, and then again, try to see where you could see yourself. So I'm from Puerto Rico, and I was, excited about the possibility of either going back or being somewhat close to home. So that kind of guided my decision making, as far as like, okay, if I can't be in Puerto Rico, can I go to a place where there's a direct flight, or where there's a direct flight, or the weather is comparable. And that was huge. And again, sort of tempering my expectations and being like, okay, maybe I should apply to like a range of schools, to a broader range of schools, where it was like, okay, I have like my dream schools, and then my schools where I could maybe it's not the best program, but I can really I can see myself there, and I have a more realistic shot of being there. So I think that was really crucial in my second time around. And it went a lot better. So the first round I applied to 4 schools. Second round I applied to 8 because I wasn't taking any chances. And it was a lot, more diverse range of both environments, academically and professionally. So I think that was also kind of key, having all those, that heterogeneity of experience represented.
Yeah, so I also applied to a lot of schools. I think, Lucas and I, we probably started the same way, where you cast a wide net as far as what schools you're looking into. And I think it was about 40 or 50 schools that were on my spreadsheet. Everyone's got their spreadsheet going. And the first thing that helped me narrow down my decision was really where I wanted to be. I had advice from a really great mentor that if you're the type of person to excel, you're probably going to excel no matter where you are. And you have to ask yourself where you want to be and who you want to be with. And I grew up in the Midwest, so a lot of the schools I applied to are in the Midwest. But because I moved to California after graduation, I have a really great network here, and I know a lot of the companies. So I also applied to a lot of California schools as well. That was the first thing that narrowed down my decision. And then after that, I really highly recommend the next thing is just reach out to the faculty at these schools. You know, if you can get it down to a list of between 10 and 20, I know it's still a lot. Look through the faculty and just do a keyword search for things that you're interested in. At the time, I was really interested in glycobiology, immunology, cell recognition. And so those were the keywords I put into like the faculty page, and it would just jump me real quick to each faculty who was doing those things. And I would just print out 2 or 3 papers on each one, pick the ones that were my favorite and start with those and just jump in and email the professor with all my questions on that paper. Now it's really good to open up a line of communication. And that whole process helps you, or gives you a glimpse at the culture of the institution. Some of the schools I applied to were not very responsive. Other schools that I applied to set up Zoom calls with me. Professors were like, these questions are so good that I don't want to answer over the email. Let's have a phone call. And that was really nice. So that, yeah, opening up a line of communication with the schools you're interested in, I think is, you know, a great way to go from a list of 10 to 20 to your list of, you know, 5 to 10. I actually applied to 13. So, you know, I had no idea how competitive I was going to be. So yeah. And again, I applied to some REACH schools and safe schools, and, you know, we all do that. So yeah, that was kind of my process.
Yeah, so mine isn't too different. I didn't start off with 20 to 30 schools. That would have stressed me out to whittle that down. But I did start off with 13. So at the time when I was applying, I was in Texas, and I knew that I wanted to go back to California, or just back to the West Coast in general. So geographical location is very important to me. I had a lot of mentorship during my program, and they're telling me you have to be, you know, not just happy with the research, but you have to be happy with your environment. And like, particularly like Scripps being right by the beach is, I can't think of anything better. But yeah, so I had 13 schools originally, and then I narrowed it down to about 9 schools. So all along the West Coast. And I really encourage you to take the time. It'll take days, maybe weeks, to go through the school's website, go through the faculty list, and just, you don't have to read everybody's paper, but really take time to explore their webpage or their faculty page to get an idea of their research. And my advice about that would be that you don't have to have experience in it. You just have to have interest, and you have to make sure that interest can be translated through your personal statement or something like that. And yeah, so they can get a good idea. I do recommend reaching out if you have some good questions. Don't reach out with maybe basic questions. Make sure that you really want to have a conversation with them. Don't just talk to talk. Yeah, I got into about 5 schools out of my list of 9. Yeah, that was my experience with that. Oh, you're on mute, Nydia.
That would explain that. So great. That sounds like you guys all spent quite a lot of time, you know, scouting out and trying to figure out the programs that were really aligned to your priorities, for example, geographical location and, you know, the weather and things like that. Would you say that that's the hardest part of the application, or maybe really quickly say like what you spent the longest time on, or what you felt was the hardest part of the application process for you?
I would say I probably spent the most time just writing the essays, but that's not necessarily making it the hardest, because a lot of times, you know, you need to spend an hour just copy editing yourself, right? I would say, yeah, probably the hardest part for me was forcing myself to narrow down what I wanted, who I wanted to work with, and sort of going through that mental process of figuring out exactly what I want to do.
So I also wanted to add on to the previous point that you know, it's totally fine to focus on whatever you want to focus, like, not, you know, it doesn't always have to be about the most prestigious place. You know, everybody has their own sort of metrics and hierarchy. And if you know, want to be at a less competitive place, but you're closer to family or support system, and that'll make you more comfortable and feel better, that's what's going to lead to you producing the best work. Just adding on to that, I definitely spent the most time writing my personal statement and making sure it was a compelling, accurate reflection of who I am, the experience that has shaped me both as a person and as a scientist, what my ambitions are for graduate education, and why this particular program was the best place to do it, or what the unique advantages of that place were for me, which definitely took a long time to sort of craft, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist in that regard. Grace.
So the hardest part for me was the GRE, which is silly because it's not required. But yeah, I've been out of school for so long. I had no idea how competitive I was. I thought maybe if I could show them a good recent score, they would know I still knew how to read and take a test. But when I was taking the GRE, I was actually about 10 weeks pregnant, and morning sickness combined with just studying, combined with staring at a screen for 4 hours taking that exam was awful, like just awful mentally and physically, and that sucks. And it wasn't even required. So I don't know. Of course, being in this position where I'm already accepted into a program, I'm going to tell everyone, don't even take it. But I understand if you're out there saying, I want to have every ball in my court, So yeah, try not to stress too hard about the GRE, because I think it's the least fun part, and it also is not very important. But then the essays, that was the longest part. It takes a long time to really say what you want to say, and you spend a lot of time refining every last word. So it takes a long time, but I thought the essay was really fun, because you kind of get an opportunity to look back at your entire track record as a scientist and see, who am I and what have I done? And I had been working for 7 years, so it's really easy for a lot of the big accomplishments to be lost in the minutia. And seeing all of the key points kind of put out on one page, I was like, yeah, that's some cool stuff I've done. So yeah, I think that part, it takes the longest time, but it's really fun to do. So also, I see a point from Brian Rogers on the greatest fear. I actually know him, so I'm going to call him out. Brian, if your paper is not accepted by December 1st, you should still say that you have a manuscript in review. That's definitely worth putting on your resume or putting on your application. So if anyone else is in that position where you have a publication that's waiting to be accepted, tell people that the manuscript is being reviewed, because that is also a good thing. Yeah, Garrett, go ahead.
All right, so Grace, you just reminded me of the GRE. I kind of blocked that out from my memory last summer. But yeah, it's not required now. So, if you think that you did really good and should include that, then go for it. But I didn't submit that with this application because it wasn't perfect. So I thought I had other things to compensate for GRE. But I would say something that took the longest time on this application was the research statement. Just because I had quite a few different research experiences. I had 3 different experiences, one in neurophysiology, one in chemical engineering, and then one in a drug discovery lab. And I kind of had to morph that into an evolutionary story, kind of how I went from one to the other and how that developed my passion while sticking to the science. So you have to find a good balance between telling a story but keeping it professional and put those good details in there about your research. So that's what took me the longest time. And my biggest advice on that would be send it to your mentors, send it to your PIs, get some feedback on it, because yeah, that will be very helpful.
Wow, excellent advice, guys. And I really like that when we're talking about, statement of purpose and your essays, it really does bring out your individual stories and essays, just talking about your approach to it. So I'm really glad that you guys all mentioned that. But, some people actually think getting a letter of recommendation is the hardest part. So what kind of tips or advice can you give a student that's apprehensive about asking for a letter of recommendation? I'm not sure whether it's because you don't know who to ask or what kind of approach you take to ask, right? So how did you guys approach, the letter of recommendation part of your application process? I know Jose mentioned that you emailed Courtney Miller directly, so maybe you could, start us off and I can ask everyone else to add.
Sure. So I'll add that any opportunity I've ever had in science started off with a very admittedly naive, almost naive email, where I did not know who the person was or as in the field, and I just messaged them and they ended up being surprisingly nice. And if somebody isn't supportive and pulls out an ego, then it might not be somebody you want to work with anyway. So consider that dodging a bullet. In that regard, I thought about who could most accurately understand and represent my character, right? Who could best attest to my strengths as a researcher, as a person, and then kind of made a point to remind them of that when asking. So for example, if I'm writing to a professor, I would say I'm writing to you because I really enjoyed XYZ about your class, or about the way you explained this. I found it particularly engaging. I'm writing to you because I feel like you were the best person to attest to my character or attest to my strengths in this. Specifically, and then give them sort of the ammo that they need, right? If maybe it was a big class and they don't remember you, just be like, I feel like you could best talk about how I really jumped on these group discussions, or really was very engaged in class, especially in this topic. And then also just be respectful of their time, right? Set clear deadlines. I'm applying to, if they accept, I'm applying to XYZ schools. The deadline is in 6 weeks. I think that's really key. Just, don't wait till the last minute. Give them at least a month or, some time. But I think if you never ask, I think it's something you just have to do. Just think about who could best represent your character, not the fanciest person. A thoughtful letter from a postdoc might be better or more informative to an admissions committee than just a standard letter from Dr. Big Shot that he had his assistant write, or that he had you write, which is bananas. And I think that's probably the best advice I can give in that regard.
Sure. Thanks. I see Lucas, Grace, and Garrett nodding their heads. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
I'll just toss in quickly because I think we're all going to have a lot of the similar advice. Yeah, it has to be somebody that knows you, and make sure it's somebody that has a background in something that's relevant, right? It doesn't have to be exactly what you're going into, but make sure that the person writing the letter is able to express in words that the admissions committee is going to care about why you're a good fit, right? So your baseball coach isn't going to be able to talk about why you're going to be a good academic researcher, for example. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and I wanted to add too that after I was accepted, I've been, bumping into professors in the lab and stuff, and I asked some people who were on the admissions panel what made my application stand out. Why did they accept me to Scripps? And every single one of them who I've had the chance to ask has said it was the letters of recommendation. So they are an important part of the application. So yeah, it's a fine line. Someone who knows you well and will speak highly of you, and also somebody who's has a good reputation as a scientist. If you can find someone who ticks both of those boxes, that's the person you want.
And the last piece of advice I'll give is just give them a heads up as soon as possible. So if you're applying this season, I think you should send an email this week. Just a heads up, I'm going to be applying to grad school, and you will be receiving emails from schools. You don't have to have the schools nailed down, but just let them know to expect it, because the worst thing I had a group of friends who were all applying last year, and it's a week before the deadline and the letter's not in and they're stressing out, and it's just not good for your mental health. So just get that in as soon as possible so your PI or mentor or postdoc, whoever's writing your letter, can get that done and send it as they come. And that will be easier on them too. You don't want to shoot them a list 2 weeks before of 10 schools and they have to make it customized to each one. So get it in as soon as possible.
Great advice. Yeah. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit. And, even before you guys started the application process, I know, Grace, you mentioned that you are balancing, being pregnant and doing the GRE and, balancing work and life. And there's this stereotype that a grad student doesn't really have a life, right? That's always studying, very smart. And sometimes this stereotype can really lead to some of the imposter syndrome or this feeling of not belonging that we're seeing in the chat here. So maybe you can start off by explaining how that relates to choosing grad school as the option, right?
Oh yeah, I've got a lot to say about this, but sorry, I'm so loud. I'll narrow it down in my comments. Imposter syndrome is a real thing, and it can stop people from applying to programs and just taking general opportunities in life. If you feel that, you need to face that head on. Because I know a lot of people who say, you know what, I've got kids, I'm in my 30s, grad school for me. Don't look at anything that defines you as a reason not to pursue an opportunity. Look at your goals, and those should guide what opportunities you pursue. I know that I want to have a higher scientific position in industry. I know I want to be director level, board of directors, C-suite. These are goals I know I have for myself. So even though I'm not the typical demographic that pursues a PhD, that's not something that should intimidate you. And it really intimidated me, especially being pregnant throughout the whole process. And my baby was 5 weeks old at my first interview, and I had to leave her at home with my husband and my 2-year-old and fly out on interviews. And I had to pump in the bathroom because I was nursing her. And there's just, so at the interviews, a lot of times you'll have like a faculty dinner at one of the faculty members' houses. I had to find a room to pump, and I didn't want to tell anyone that I was like breastfeeding because I thought it might interfere with my chance of being accepted. So I didn't even tell people. I just like found a corner somewhere. And those types of things can make you feel like you don't belong, but they are not, I don't want to say they're not real, but you're probably thinking about those things way more than anyone else. So if there's something in your life that you feel is holding you back that's not related to your ability or your goals, try and just quiet that thought, because it's not as important as you think it is. At least my experience at Scripps in particular has been really accommodating, very welcoming. I don't know all of the situations that people might be in because we're all coming from very different backgrounds, but those fears, I think a good way to approach it is ask yourself if that fear is related to your ability or your desire. And if it's not, if it's just something about who you are that's miscellaneous, for lack of a better word, don't let it get in your way. I mean, you might need to modify your plan a little bit. Certainly having a family means that my day-to-day schedule is different from the typical graduate student. But those aren't reasons to not pursue these goals in your life, for graduate school or otherwise. So I encourage all of you to just, go for it.
Great advice. I think like everyone else should chime in. What was your greatest fear or what's your biggest obstacle when considering grad school?
I guess my biggest fear was kind of going through the whole process and then getting to, wherever I was going to be, and then turning out that I made a wrong decision, like I picked a wrong place, or that I didn't really like where I was at, or something like that. Kind of a grass is greener on the other side sort of thing.
Sure. How about you, Jose?
So I was afraid of not getting in again. I did not want to spend another year I did not want to spend another year at my job, which was lovely, but I didn't want to be in the Northeast anymore. So that was something. Whether or not, you know, I had what it took to be a scientist at this level, and if other people have done it, why can't I? I think that was something where I had to see where, you know, there are wildly mediocre, overly confident people everywhere who just apply for things that they're not qualified for, and they get them all the time. So why shouldn't you if you know you're qualified? So absolutely, that was something I had to, like, you know, accept and embrace.
Definitely, yeah. What about you, Garrett?
Yeah, so like Jose, I guess my biggest fear was not getting in at first. But once the invitations start rolling in, then you can kind of take a sigh of relief. And they will roll in. I had to have a lot of counseling sessions with my friends and mentors, like, I haven't heard back yet, but you will. Yeah, I guess now that I'm in grad school, I guess the biggest insecurity, I guess you could say, is just, you know, am I in the right place? Can I perform at the level that my PI wants me to at this type of institution? But so far, in my experience, I'm in a pretty big lab, actually a very big lab. There's about 20 plus postdocs in my lab, you know, so I feel like, oh my goodness, all these brilliant people around me. But, you know, they're willing to, more than happy to answer questions you have and provide mentorship. And so, yeah, I think we'll all feel like at some point, maybe we bit off more than we can chew, but you just gotta, you know, get through it, and you'll be better on the other side. That's my opinion so far, at least, after being in the program for 2 months.
Sure. So the last question I have, and maybe we can start with Garrett on this, because I know you had different research experiences. So one of the questions we usually get is, should I just go for any opportunity that comes my way, or should I wait for something that, you know, really makes sense to something I really like? And I'd like each of you to weigh in, but maybe Garrett, you can speak to how you had all of these different experiences and how you made it work, as you said.
Yeah, I did not have a set course of the way I wanted to go. I just rolled with it and what made the most sense to me, and just followed my interest along the way. But I did take opportunities that I thought were a little outside of my comfort zone. Like when I got an opportunity to do research in chemical engineering, I'm like, I don't love math that much, but let's try this out and see how it works. And I loved it. So yeah, I think you have to take chances, I think, in life. And I think you have to go directions you may think that you didn't originally want to go. But just leave yourself open. That's my biggest piece of advice about that. Yeah, I know that not everybody wants to do a post-bac. I surely didn't when I was applying for one, because I'm like, oh, this is a year of my life. You know, it's basically a cherry on top for an application potential. But you know, I'm at Scripps because of it. So I think that you have to really evaluate where you are and plan around that, what direction you should take.
Sure. Does anyone else have anything else to add for that? Jose, I know you've had a couple of research experiences as well before.
I'm so sorry. What did you want me to
Oh, no, I meant like your research experiences before you actually chose to come to Scripps Research with, you know, how they aligned or how you chose. Did you choose specifically ones that made sense to you, or did you have multiple opportunities? How did you navigate that?
So honestly, I was never interested in. So I you know, reached out. I was originally interested in like psychopharmacology research, but there just weren't any active labs where I was going to school, and I was in summer break in Puerto Rico, and I randomly messaged this graduate student that I knew, and he invited me to come and chat, and then I realized I really enjoyed like fear, learning, and memory research, and then I ended up staying there the entire summer, and then that prompted me to go and talk to a field researcher at Northeastern. And then when my sort of stint as a technician ended there, I was like, I need a job. It wasn't, I wasn't specifically searching for more fear, learning, and memory, which is eventually what I loved. I needed a job, so I was searching for everything, and then I ended up at an early life stress lab, which was maybe not what I was most interested in, but it was incredibly valuable and formative just to develop those skills, because a lot of the times graduate school really won't be where you study exactly what you want, but you will develop necessary skills as a scientist, as a critical thinker, as somebody who can educate yourself on a topic that you might not be incredibly familiar with, but you can break things down and digest them into basic concepts. And then for graduate school, it was just fortuitous that there was a researcher who was working on exactly my interests, and that was Dr. Miller, where it was, I got lucky in that regard, and my experience has so far been great. But I would definitely encourage people to be open-minded about the science that they can do, and focus on the skills and knowledge that they can gain and other experiences, while you keep your eyes on the prize and sort of play the long game in that respect.
Right. Dawn, did you have something to add?
Well, I just wanted to know if you don't mind, I know we only have 15 minutes and there are some specific questions for some of the students that I'm hoping that we can get to. There's one particularly for Lucas that I'm hoping he can address, and then maybe I can find some others while he's answering this question.
Sure. I was actually going to ask Grace, since she's had more of a try everything kind of approach, how there's a question in here for what is the process of choosing rotations like, and how you approach that without,
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that I don't know if anyone really has a strategy here. I don't have a strategy. I just kind of go with who's available, who seems nice, what's interesting. There's so many factors to consider that it's really hard to say what your strategy was. But I think that just reaching out to people who are interesting, and then seeing who you communicate well with, who seems to have the time and engage with you, that's the best way to approach it, specifically a lab rotation. But I also took a very similar approach when I was applying programs in general, just what program seemed the most responsive, who was willing to engage in the conversation. So yeah, if I had to narrow it down, I would say that, just trying to talk to people. But yeah, I don't think it's bad to not really have a focus on what you want to do, because, we're scientists, we're naturally curious. I don't know any scientists who are only interested in the thing they specialize in. Everybody I know thinks all science is cool, so it's largely, your specialty will largely be dictated by the opportunities that you pursue and the relationships you build. And in a different time, in a different place, you might have ended up being a specialist in something totally different, but you'd probably still love it and be passionate about it. So I'd say, don't worry so much about the topic, and just, let your passion, the people you like being with, your enjoyment that you get from your activities, let that guide you. I think you'll be just fine. Was that easy?
Maybe I can jump in here and ask Lucas. So Lucas, there's a question to you about, since you came straight from undergrad, did you feel like you were less prepared than other students who did take time off? This person's a senior in undergrad and debating if they should take time off or apply straight. Do you have any advice for the students?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, the first step is kind of to ask yourself some questions, right? Do I feel like I have the experience? Do I know what I want to do? Do I have a reason for feeling that way, kind of thing? But a good place to start, if you're ever kind of not sure, and I'm going to pivot a little bit here, Don, if you don't mind. There's another question that asks about how do you judge if you are competitive for a program? these are the type of questions you need to go to a mentor with, because a mentor will be able to say, okay, I can see that you've spent a good amount of time in the research lab. You're doing well with the material. Clearly, you are ready to take the next step. I think most mentors are going to be pretty frank with you if they think, no, you're not ready. You need to do some more preparation. So in my case, I had spent a good amount of time in the research lab. And, when I asked myself the question, I said, am I going to get a whole lot more from staying in here, i.e. taking a year off and doing something like a postbac, for example? And I think the answer came back, I don't think so. And when I went to my mentor, he agreed with me. To go to the pivot question, the competitiveness one, you have to ask people who know, because the fact of the matter is, you can go on your favorite ranking, website or Reddit or whatever it is, and try to get an idea for what competitive is, or where you are. It's not going to help you very much. You need to ask somebody who has a personal connection with you and a personal connection with the field, and they'll be able to give you a much more thorough, much more personalized answer. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, Lucas, I mean, the best way to know if you're competitive is to apply. If you got in, you were competitive. If not, build on the things you think you were lacking in. There's no harm in applying other than budgetary concerns, which are real. But yeah, if you're on the fence, apply and see if you can get feedback, and maybe apply another year. A lot of people apply multiple years. In fact, I'd say probably most people apply multiple times. So yeah, that's another thing. Don't let a rejection discourage you, because that's the path most people take. So yeah.
Great advice, yes. So I have another question here, which I guess, Lucas, you've been a part of some of the networking events that we put together as part of outreach. So the question here is, could you talk about other programs that students participate in, such as Journal Club, etc.? So maybe you can talk about some of the stuff that you've participated in, and then others can add.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch, frankly. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's at least a tab for outreach on the Scripps website and another one for like student activities. And I can tell you, I actually spent a lot of time looking at those before I even applied. Obviously, things are a little different now since most things are virtual, but I know there's a journal club amongst each campus's first-year students where we're all going to give a presentation and kind of practice that skill. There's like a women in science one. I had participated so far a lot in the outreach, something very important to me. And I know that there's a lot of initiative that's being sort of led by the students. It's not just that, I volunteer and then Nitya here kind of comes in and tells me what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm sort of allowed to come in and say, hey, I think that's a bad idea. Let's try this. So there's a lot of opportunities to get involved in different sort of student life things, depending on what you're interested in, what you care about outside of the lab.
Anyone have anything else to add? Well, I have like a couple of questions here that's more about the statement of purpose, or like your personal research statement. And it's like, how much personal context is appropriate for that kind of situation? Obviously, other working commitments are relevant, but would you really put in distracting personal information, and how would you really, figure that out? So maybe you guys can, if anyone wants to jump in, explain how you really put your personal information in your personal statement.
Yeah, I can jump into that. Distracting personal information is an interesting concept. I had to kind of ask myself if I wanted to include the fact that I have kids in my application. I did a little bit of research on that, and I saw a lot of people who were saying they did include that they have kids because it's a big part of their life. For me, though, I had this fear that if I got rejected, I was going to think it was because I had kids, and I didn't want that weighing on my relationship with my kids, which is a weird psychological thing. I decided to leave that pretty much out. My research statement, your research statement is more straightforward. It's just your scientific experience. So that's not very personal. That's easy. Well, not easy, but straightforward. The personal statement that goes along with your research statement should have something about who you are as a person. For me, it was just about how I love collaborating with people, my passion for science, experiences I had as a kid. that got me interested in science. I did not put in any distracting personal information, which I do think is actually a good phrase for what that is. That was just my personal decision because I didn't want to be rejected and feel like it was because of those reasons. So that was the decision I made, and I know people who've made other decisions. So yeah, I think that's more up to the applicant.
Great answer, Garrett.
Yeah, so when I was writing my personal statement last year, I filled about like 2.5 pages, and it was like my life story. And I was, talking about my hardships, and I gave it to my mentor. I was like, hey, can you check this out? And she said, this is a lot, and this is heavy. And I think that if you're gonna, we all have experienced some hardships, and I do think that if you're gonna mention it, it's okay. That's shaped you into who you are. But make sure you can tie that back really quickly to why you're applying to graduate school. I think that something that I got stuck in when I was first applying was like, well, I deserve this because this was hard for me and this was hard for me, and I overcame that. And I think that it's better just to take the approach as like, this happened and this made me realize that PhD is what I wanted to pursue. So I think it's okay to mention some things, but keep a limit to it would be my advice on how personal you get.
And I could just add, if anyone is having trouble with this, you can email me and I can just talk with you one-on-one, because I know sometimes these things are hard to figure out. So if anyone has a question like that, feel free to reach out to me personally and I can help you talk through it.
Great. So our question here is, what is an example of good dialogue with professors? And Lucas, I think you wanted to answer this.
Yes, I did. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So I think I became pretty dang good at writing cold emails. So as people said earlier, get to know before you even start talking to people what the work that people are doing is about. I'll give you an example. I worked in synthetic chemistry as an undergrad, and I was kind of interested in pivoting a little bit towards some more bio stuff. I heard about Hans Renata, who works on the Florida campus here, and I knew he kind of mixed some biochemical stuff and some synthetic chemistry. And so what I did is I went and read papers. I went and, saw who he had collaborated with in the past, that kind of thing. And so what I would do was I would simply send an email, and you can even send a follow-up email if you do it right, But basically I said, hey, I'm Lucas. I gave him a very quick bio, like 3 sentences. This is where I'm at. This is what I'm interested in. I really, really like what you're doing. It ties into what I'm interested in because of these reasons. I've read your paper X, and, factoid Y from it was super cool. Would you be open to chatting about it? And a sort of interesting, I don't know if it was a strategy that I had too, was to, in the same email, suggest, if you don't have time or you feel like, maybe that's not going to be very productive, could you direct me to a graduate student in your lab who might be able to talk a little bit about it? And so what this does is it shows that you have a real commitment to their lab, their work, and then it opens the doors that you can have that personal discussion. Because I think if I refer back to the question here, what's an example of a good dialogue, right? You want to be able to get a question and an answer. You want to be having a back and forth. And so the important thing is that you're able to construct questions in a conversation, hopefully, after they get back to you, that really lets you kind of lift the veil and see what's behind the website. Because a website will show you what they talk about that they're working on, but you don't really have an idea of what they're excited about, what the graduate students are working on, that kind of stuff. So it's really important that you spend some time thinking about what you want to know. I'll leave it there because I have a tendency to keep talking after I should be done.
Not at all. So, there's a couple of questions in here, again, just about like the personal statement and like your research statement. And I think we've answered a couple of those, but maybe you guys can summarize, and each of you can take turns and talk about like the career goals that you have and how Scripps Research has really been the answer for you. And maybe also, I think some of the concerns with COVID right now, should you be applying to a graduate program? Are you facing any difficulties? Just summarize like your actual experience currently in terms of your career goals to summarize. And we can go, Lucas. Jose, Grace, and Garrett.
So my sort of career objectives now is I want to go into academics, but I'm also very interested in education, outreach, communication. So those are kind of like things that I'm super interested in. And so when I was applying, I did spend time looking at what opportunities in those realms was available. I knew Scripps has a fantastic outreach setup, especially in the California side, led by Nitya here a lot of the time. And I know in Florida they're trying to set it up, and so I could, get involved in that in a way. And then in addition, I mean, it's Scripps. It's a fantastic spot to, go into pretty much whatever you want to do in terms of your technical capacity. So I was aware of that being a benefit. In terms of the COVID stuff, I mean, it obviously affects us, right? Things are different, especially with respect to like the networking things. For example, I've only interacted in person with like 3 or 4 other first years on the campus, which is kind of weird. It feels a little isolating sometimes. But there's efforts to stop that. We're meeting a lot via Zoom with other students. And I think in terms of the actual lab work, it's different, right? I have to wear a mask. I have to be cognizant of how far away I am from everybody. Everybody has their shifts, but Scripps, I think, is doing a fantastic job of doing it in a way that is not losing the productivity, is not losing your experience as a researcher.
Right, to sort of Lucas's point, I'm so sorry. To sort of Lucas's point, I think it's really important to just kind of take a look at how the institutes that you're applying to are responding to COVID and see, because that is a good barometer of how involved they are and how much they care about the health and safety of their community and students. I think that is really, really important. As far as professional ambitions and how Scripps is particularly helping me achieve that, I think the way in which I think about science kind of sets me up for a career in the academic realm. I love teaching. I love communicating science. I love actually getting into specific questions. But I'm also really open to the possibility that the breadth and scope of the science that we're doing is ever expanding. So the niche where I could best sort of use my particular sort of strengths to impact public health hasn't even really been developed yet. I think that is something that we as scientists need to embrace and be excited about. So I think the sort of breadth of opportunities that you're exposed to Scripps, like Lucas said, outreach, having like the heterogeneity of faculty involvement. A lot of faculty, are on boards of companies or do a lot of outreach or do, academic or very translationally relevant science. I think there's a good sort of spectrum of career opportunities. So having that exposure and real life experience guiding your decision-making process, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, so I was kind of laughing when you're asking about what your career goal is, because my career goals are really general, but the one thing that sums it up is that I want to make a lot of money, which makes me sound really shallow. But it's not just about the money. Nobody goes into science just for money, because there are far better ways to make a lot of money. I want to make a lot of money and have a lot of fun doing it. And there's no better way to have a lot of fun than doing some good science, at least in my opinion. So make a lot of money, have a lot of fun. That's why I'm here. When I was applying to schools, the programs that stood out to me had very successful PIs. These are professors who went on to start multiple companies. They serve on board of directors for a lot of different institutions. That's what attracted me to programs. Most of the programs I applied to when I was interviewing, they would say things like, oh, you're the perfect kind of person for this company. After you graduate this program, I can guarantee you a job at this company, that company, and that company. A lot of programs I applied to said that. Scripps was the only one where the professors were like, no, I don't want you to work for me when you graduate. I want you to own your own company. I want you to be the one who's on the board seat. And so Scripps is definitely a place where people, they love the science, they have a lot of fun. They also like making money. I don't want to sound shallow when I say that, but you know, it's a well-rounded place for a scientist. You know, you get to do a lot of things that are not just siloed in your ivory tower, thinking of some obscure scientific principle, but not applying it. I mean, at Scripps, you really are taking the science and moving it into the public in a useful way. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. I guess that's my career goal and why I'm here.
That's great.
Yeah, so my career goal, I mean, I'm interested in industry. And kind of like I mentioned at the beginning of this session, I said geographical location was important to me. And San Diego is a really big hub for biotech industry. And so that's what's really appealing about Scripps, because a lot of the professors here have connections to industry, and I want to get that experience during grad school. I'm open to academia, but yeah, I think I thrive in a fast-paced environment, something where, you know, either I'm starting a you know, biotech startup or just working for a pharmaceutical company. And it's pretty exciting. Like my PI right now, I'm in the Cravat lab, and he has a few companies of his own, and he collaborates with Pfizer. I'm like, this is awesome. And then another lab that I'm planning on rotating with for my second rotation, that's the Blong lab. He has a lot of collaboration with the small molecule screening facility, Caliber, that's connected to Scripps in the California campus. And so I'm excited about that. So there's a lot of opportunities to kind of cross over into the more industrial setting.
Amazing, great. So I'd like to thank all of you guys for taking the time today and sharing your experiences and kind of traveling back to when you started applying for grad school. I hope that we've motivated our attendees for today. And with that, I think I'll hand this back over to Dawn and Rosie. So thanks.